A fifth season was announced. A summer 2020 air date was reportedly set. Then nothing happened. No explanation, no cancellation statement, no goodbye. That was Steve Darnell, the man behind Welder Up and the face of Discovery Channel's Vegas Rat Rods. After 4 seasons, 48 episodes, and builds that looked like they rolled out of a post-apocalyptic fever dream, the cameras simply stopped. Discovery Channel never officially canceled the show. They just never brought it back. For fans of the series, that silence raised an obvious question. Steve had just finished what he publicly called the best season they'd ever made. The production company had changed, the creative constraints had loosened, and the show's audience spanned not just the United States but Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and South Africa. So what actually happened? The answer isn't simple, and it's connected to a chain of events that started long before Vegas Rat Rods ever aired. Because the story of how Steve Darnell got to television and then quietly stepped away from it begins not in Las Vegas at all. It begins on a ranch in rural Montana with a kid who wasn't allowed to touch other people's cars. Steve Darnell was born in Las Vegas, but grew up split between 2 completely different worlds. He lived with his mother and stepfather in Billings, Montana, and spent chunks of his childhood on a working ranch near Broadus and Ekalika, owned by his aunt and uncle. Out there, he learned to milk cows, drive farm equipment from the 1930s and 40s, and repair whatever broke down. The machinery was old, rugged, and constantly in need of attention. That environment left a mark. His father, meanwhile, had established a steel company called Economy Steel in Las Vegas. When Steve visited Summers, he spent that time at the shop, learning to weld. By the time he was a teenager, he had 2 educations running in parallel, rancher and fabricator, and neither one had anything to do with polished car shows. That distinction mattered. Steve has spoken about being taken to car shows as a boy and not being allowed to touch anything. The pristine hot rods were off limits, but rat rods, rough, aggressive, purposefully worn, were the opposite of that. They were built to be experienced. That attitude would define everything he built later. When Steve started Welder Up, the shop wasn't building rat rods at all. It was repairing heavy machinery and agricultural equipment in Shepherd, Montana. He was good at it, practical about it, and not particularly pointed toward television fame or custom car celebrity. The turn came in 2008, and it came from an idea that most people in the car world told him wouldn't work. In 2008, Steve Darnell did something that traditionalists in the hot rod world found genuinely strange. He took a 5.9-liter Cummins diesel engine out of a Dodge pickup and dropped it into a slammed 1933 Dodge 4-door sedan. He twin-turbocharged it. The result produced around 1,000 horsepower. He called it the D-Rod, and when he drove it to a car show, it disappeared behind clouds of diesel exhaust and smoking tires. The reaction was immediate. People hadn't seen anything like it. Within a short period, the D-Rod landed in Hot Rod magazine, which put Welder Up on the map in a way that nothing before it had. Phone calls started coming in. Gearheads across the country wanted Steve to build cars for them. The agricultural equipment repair business was no longer the point. He relocated Welder Up to Las Vegas, where the shop could grow, and shifted the business model entirely toward custom rat rod fabrication. To understand how unusual this pivot was, Steve wasn't chasing fame or a television deal. He had no particular interest in becoming a celebrity. He's described the whole thing as a sick passion that got out of hand in the best possible way. The D-Rod wasn't a strategic move. It was the result of a man with decades of diesel experience from working on farm equipment who simply thought, why not? What he didn't know was that the D-Rod would eventually attract the attention of a television production company, which would lead to Discovery Channel, which would lead to a 4-season run that drew viewers on 4 continents. Vegas Rat Rods premiered on April 17, 2014. The format was straightforward. Each episode followed a build from start to finish, with clients commissioning one-of-a-kind vehicles that reflected something personal about their lives. The shop's code, as Steve put it, was simple: no drama, no fake, no shiny and pretty. The first season ran 8 episodes, the second expanded to 10. The show built a genuine following, not enormous by mainstream TV standards, but loyal and international. Steve worked 7 days a week, 12-hour days, building cars while simultaneously helping produce the episodes. He described it as some of the hardest work he'd ever done. But the road between seasons was not smooth. After season 3 ended, there was a 15-month gap before season 4 aired. During that stretch, many viewers assumed the show had been quietly dropped. There was a production company change. The first 3 seasons had been handled by a Canadian company called Proper Television, but season 4 was produced directly by Discovery Studios. Cast member Cheyenne Ruther left the show during that transition, and Steve's sons Chase and Cash joined the crew full-time. Steve was candid about what that change meant. He said Season 4 was the best work they'd done, that the new arrangement gave them significantly more creative freedom. He felt like the show had finally found its full potential. Season 4 ran its final episode on October 30, 2018. That was the last time a new episode of Vegas Rat Rods aired on Discovery Channel. A fifth season was publicly anticipated. Reports indicated it was scheduled for summer 2020. Then the pandemic arrived in early 2020 and disrupted production schedules across the industry. When summer 2020 came and went without Season 5, there was no formal word from Discovery Channel, no cancellation announcement, no explanation, nothing. That ambiguity has never fully resolved. Discovery Channel did not issue an official statement. Steve Darnell has not publicly given a detailed breakdown of the behind-the-scenes reasons. What is documented is that the production had already experienced one lengthy gap between seasons, that cast dynamics had shifted, and that the pandemic created a genuine logistical barrier exactly when Season 5 was reportedly due. Whether the decision not to return was made by the network, by Steve, or by both, that remains unclear. What is clear is that Steve Darnell did not wait around for an answer. While the TV silence was becoming permanent, he was already building something different. The version of Welder Up that exists in 2026 bears little resemblance to the shop Steve started repairing tractors and combines in Montana. The Las Vegas location now operates 6 days a week. It offers shop tours where visitors can walk the same floor where those builds were fabricated and see Steve's personal collection of vehicles up close. The shop also hosts welding workshops, in-person sessions divided into dedicated TIG and MIG training taught by Steve himself. In 2020, he launched an online welding course at welder101.com, which extended his reach well beyond Las Vegas. For people who spent years watching him fabricate on television and wanted to learn the actual techniques, the platform offered something the show never could: direct instruction. His creative work expanded in other directions as well. He designed the post-apocalyptic vehicles, costumes, and set pieces for Five Finger Death Punch's music video for House of the Rising Sun, a project that drew on exactly the same visual imagination that made his rat rod stand out on television. He also collaborated with Pro Charger on a 1957 Chevy build connected to his Montana roots, tracking down the same model year that once drove through his hometown when he was a kid. By 2026, Steve had been confirmed as a featured guest at Alberta Diesel Day, scheduled for June 27 and 28 at Rad Torque Raceway, a large diesel event drawing fans from across North America. He remains active at SEMA and has continued building charitable tribute vehicles for veterans. His Instagram following sits above 400,000. His YouTube presence remains active. Welder Up is not a museum, it's a functioning fabrication shop that also teaches, builds, and occasionally hosts weddings for couples who want to exchange vows surrounded by hand-built mechanical art. Steve Darnell's story is ultimately the story of a man who built his empire twice, once in metal and once in something harder to define. The television run ended not with a dramatic exit, but with the kind of quiet fade that often follows when a niche show meets an industry-wide disruption at exactly the wrong moment. What remains is the shop, and if anything, the shop has proven to be more durable than the show ever was. Welder Up existed before the cameras arrived, survived the gaps between seasons, and kept operating after Discovery Channel went silent. Steve described his interest in pitching new show concepts, something where he would travel and meet rat rod builders around the world, rather than building solely inside the shop. Whether that happens remains an open question. What Season 5 would have looked like, and whether a new format could eventually bring Steve back to television, is something longtime fans continue to wonder about. He has spent his life proving people wrong who told him something couldn't be done. A Cummins diesel in a 1933 Dodge, a fabrication shop in the desert, a television show about rust and junkyard metal that found an audience on 4 continents. The one question he hasn't answered yet is whether the cameras will ever roll again. Do you think Steve Darnell should return to television, or has Welder Up become something more interesting without it?